If you want to change what you're manifesting, you have to become accountable for the emotional patterns you're practicing every day. So you can change your goals or make a new vision board or say new affirmations and decide that you're stepping into your next level. But if you're still emotionally responding to your life in the same way every day, you're basically running new goals through the same old operating system. And I think this is one of the biggest things people miss about manifestation because we become so focused on getting over there or getting the relationship, the friendships, the life, like becoming her or him, that we don't notice the emotional patterns we're rehearsing right here. So, if you're constantly disappointed with your current reality while trying to manifest a better one, disappointment itself can become one of your most practiced emotional states. But that also doesn't mean spiritually bypassing yourself and walking around saying everything is amazing. I'm grateful for everything when something genuinely doesn't feel right. So you can appreciate your life, accept where you are, and still recognize that certain relationships, patterns, or circumstances need to change. So, manifestation isn't about escaping your current life. It's about noticing the emotional state you keep returning to. Because the more consistently you live in that state, the more it becomes the frequency shaping what you create and experience. So think of your manifestation system almost like an operating system that's constantly running in the background. Something happens, you interpret that what happens in your body and responds physiologically, and emotions come up. And then you behave or react based on all of that. And your reaction can reinforce the original thought and start the loop all over again. Now, imagine repeating similar loops hundreds and thousands of times. Eventually, you're not just having an emotion for 5 minutes, you're practicing a quality of emotions, which is a frequency, which then starts influencing how you move through the world. And this is what I mean when I talk about your frequency. Not forcing yourself to feel joyful every second, but becoming aware of the emotional state you're consistently creating and operating from. And this is why accountability is such a huge part of manifestation. Because at some point we have to ask, what am I actually practicing every day? And you don't have to blame yourself for the programming. You probably learned a lot of it unconsciously, but once you can see the loop, you have an opportunity to interrupt it. That's how you begin hacking the system instead of unconsciously allowing the system to keep running you. And let's say someone says, I want amazing friendships. I want people to respect me, to celebrate me, and genuinely want the best for me. But every time someone is upset with them, they immediately abandon themselves to make that person happy. And maybe someone is repeatedly late and doesn't check in and makes little comments and puts them down and expects constant access to their time or gets offended whenever they say no. And instead of addressing it, they smile, accommodate, and explain themselves and tell themselves it's fine. But underneath, that could be a people pleaser mask that they learned years ago. They learned good people don't disappoint me. They learned good people don't disappoint anyone. And if someone is upset with me, I did something wrong. Or if I have boundaries, they might leave. Now think about the emotional loop that's creating. Someone does something and you interpret it through that old programming. Like your body tightens and you feel anxiety or guilt. You people please, you temporarily feel safe, and the programming gets reinforced. So while consciously you're saying, I'm available for respectful relationships, your repeated behavior is still teaching your system that keeping other people comfortable is more important than respecting yourself. So this is how you hack the manifestation system. Instead of jumping straight to, okay, I'm just going to manifest better friends, I'm going to look at the patterns that I'm running, what I'm thinking and feeling, how it's showing up in my body, where that programming came from. like clear what, like for what I need to clear, and then actually practice a different response. How do you do this is first you observe what's actually happening without blame or shame. What am I thinking when someone is disappointed in me? What happens in my body? What like emotions come up, and what do I automatically do next? So this is analyzing and gathering information objectively about thoughts, physiology, and recurring patterns rather than immediately identifying with them. Then you can go underneath the behavior and see the unconscious programming running. Like, for example, where did I learn that being loved meant being agreeable? Or why does someone's disappointment feel dangerous to me? Or what am I afraid will happen if I say no? And this is where you also have to work with the energies that's being stored in your body, because you can intellectually understand why you people please and still have that old emotional charge living physically in your system. So examples of this is like maybe your shoulder elevates, or your chest tightens, or your throat closes up, or you feel like that twirling sensation in your stomach. And that physical response can feed right back into the loop. It can trigger the familiar thoughts, and those thoughts can trigger the familiar emotions. And before you know it, you're basically pulled towards the same old behavior again. So it's not always enough to say, I know I'm allowed to have boundaries, because your mind might intellectually understand that, but your body is still responding as though having a boundary feels unsafe. That's why physically releasing some of that stored dense energy through like dancing or crying or shaking or breath work or massage, like somatic release, or whatever works for your body can be such an important part of interrupting the loop. Because if your mind is saying, I'm allowed to have boundaries, but your entire body is still embracing, like setting a boundary is dangerous, there's another layer of that patterns asking to be cleared. You're not trying to force yourself into becoming this like fearless, boundary setting person overnight. You're helping your mind and your body release the old emotional charge so you have more space to respond differently. And one of the things I personally practice is what I call unbothered state. And this has changed the way I relate to people. So if somebody comes at me with their opinion or like their trauma or like their projection or something that could potentially be offensive, I don't automatically decide that I have to change them or like defend myself or absorb it or carry it around for the rest of the day. A lot of the time, I'm just like, oh, okay, because one of my highest values is peace. And I don't want my internal state controlled by every person I encounter. And that doesn't mean like I ignore everything people tell me, because sometimes somebody really is holding up a mirror and I'll go home and think like, wait, is there something here for me to look at? But if I reflect on it and realize, no, that's theirs, I can let it remain theirs instead of adopting their triggers as like my emotional responsibility. And I think that's part of why people experience me as like pretty chill, and why I can have so many different kinds of relationships and friendships, because I don't need everybody to think like they don't need to like think like me or behave like me or emotionally validate me for me to remain myself. And being unbothered also doesn't mean everybody gets like unlimited access to me. Like if somebody consistently puts me down or doesn't respect my time or repeatedly shows up late without communicating, or I'm noticing that I consistently don't feel good around them, acceptance like doesn't mean I have to keep trying to transform them into the friend I want them to be. Like I can accept them, like, oh, this is actually who this person is right now, and then decide what level of relationship works for me. Like maybe I don't see them one-on-one anymore, and I may interact with them briefly when we're in the same like community, or maybe the relationship becomes more like surface level, or maybe it like naturally falls away. and that's okay. So, unbothered state is like lovingly saying no without spending the next 6 hours angry that the other person should have known better. And that's the difference between trying to control someone else's behavior so you can finally have peace and taking responsibility for the boundaries that allow you to practice peace now. So let's start by getting curious. Let's say there's a people pleasing mask, and rather than immediately trying to become better at saying no, notice the situations where you override yourself. Who makes you feel like you need to like explain yourself? Like, who are you afraid to disappoint? Where do you say yes and immediately feel resentment? And what happens inside your body when you imagine setting a boundary? Then look underneath it. Maybe you were praised for being like the easy child, or like the helpful child, or like the reliable one, or maybe conflict felt unsafe growing up. So your system learned that keeping everybody happy kept you connected. And your job isn't to shame that version of yourself, because that pattern may have made perfect sense when you learned it, but you can decide whether it still deserves to run your relationships now. And when the emotional charge comes up, work with that too. Like, you can journal, cry, move with your body, dance, breathe, use like inner child or shadow work practices, and that like actually help you process what is there instead of pretending that it isn't there. And the key is changing the mental programming and physically releasing the emotional energy held in the body, because simply understanding a pattern intellectually doesn't necessarily change your automatic response. So then practice the new behavior in real life, because eventually the inner work has to become follow through. Like, communicate the boundary, or like learn communication skills if you need them, or say no, or stop over explaining, or change someone's level of access to you. Then I want you to do something that I think is much more fun. Okay, so don't only decide what you're no longer available for, raise your standard for what you are available for. So for example, I'm available for friends who are genuinely happy when I'm fulfilling my life, who want to see me at my best instead of like subtly trying to bring me down to a version of myself that makes them comfortable. I'm available for people who eagerly want to spend time with me, who respect my time, who communicate, and who understand that if I'm busy or nurturing something important in my life, it isn't automatically a rejection of them. And like, I'm available for relationships where there's mutual respect, freedom, encouragement, affection, consideration, and room for both people to grow. And here's the accountability piece. Don't write that list and then repeatedly abandon it because you're afraid somebody might leave. You have to start behaving as though your standards actually mean something. Like, self-respect becomes incredibly practical here, because every time you communicate clearly, honor your time, choose your level of access, or walk away from a dynamic that continuously violates your standards, you're teaching your system this is what we're available for now. And then we get to the creator part of the manifestation system, because now you're not trying to manifest different relationships while continuously operating from the emotional pattern that created the old ones. This is where you ask for what you want, and you surrender your grip on exactly how it has to arrive, and you receive what begins showing up. And you take inspired action through both masculine doing and feminine receptivity. So maybe you communicate differently, go somewhere new, join a community, accept an invitation, reach out to someone, or like simply notice that certain relationships naturally become less central as you change. And please remember, you do not have to feel like joyful and magnetic and confident and fearless every time you take one of these actions. You can be scared and still move from faith, because courage can look like your body being nervous while another part of you says, I'm still going to honor myself because I trust where I'm going. And that's very different from letting fear make the decision for you. And every time you follow through from that deeper place, you're giving your system another experience of who you are becoming. And so this is where manifestation gets much more grounded, because you're not sitting there waiting for the universe to magically change other people's behavior or how they treat you. You're changing your emotional and behavioral system through which you participate in relationships. So naturally, you're going to relate differently to the people who are already there and become available for different kinds of connections. But don't turn your next level into another place you're constantly trying to escape to, because then you can spend your entire life chasing the next manifestation and never actually in habitat of the one you're living in. Be here. Appreciate the friend who texts you today, the quiet mornings you have today, the person who makes you laugh today, like the version of yourself who has already grown tremendously, and at the same time, be willing to admit when something no longer fits. And acceptance doesn't mean like approval, and gratitude doesn't necessarily mean being compliant, and presence doesn't mean you stop wanting more. It means you're no longer withholding your peace until reality finally gives you like everything you asked for. So the next time somebody triggers you, instead of immediately asking, how do I get them to change? Use it as information about your own manifestation system and ask yourself, what are your underlying thoughts that come up? What happens in my body? What emotions came up? What did I want to do automatically? And is that response coming from that person, from the person that I consciously want to be? And if there's something for you to learn, then take the mirror and do the work. If there isn't, let what belongs to the other person stay with the other person. Then ask, what would respecting myself look like here? It may be communication. It may be I'm saying no. It may be changing your expectations. You may need to create distance. And sometimes it's simply saying, okay, and walking away and continuing to enjoy your day. Because hacking your manifestation system isn't about controlling every thought never being triggered or maintaining some perfect high vibration. It's about becoming conscious enough that your old emotional loops don't automatically get to choose your behavior anymore. So the real shift is you don't need emotional perfection to manifest differently. You just need enough awareness to stop letting the same emotional pattern lead every decision. And you can feel fear and act from faith, and feel sadness without building your identity around sadness, or notice anger without letting anger choose your next move, and encounter somebody else's emotional chaos without making chaos your own. And that's a follow through at an emotional level, because choosing again and again and again what you actually want to practice, even when the old programming is still making some noise, over time, you're not just saying you value peace, respect, healthy relationships. What happens is your boundaries, communication, choices, nervous system, and behavior begins reflecting those values too. And that's when you're sending a very different signal, because you're consistently living from a different frequency, because you have a different emotional quality. You aren't desperately trying to become the future version of you anymore. You are present enough to appreciate who you are now while consistently following through as the person you are becoming. So, okay, thank you for watching my video. And if you would like to work with me, check out my links on my YouTube homepage. Bye.